The whiskey-soaked stranger stumbled through the door of the trading post just as Theresa Turner was lifting a crate of flour, and his wild eyes locked onto hers with such desperation that she nearly dropped her burden right there on the worn wooden floor. It was late September in 1878, and Galesburg, Illinois had seen its share of rough characters passing through on their way west, but something about this man made her throat tighten with instinctive fear. She opened her mouth to call for her uncle who ran the establishment, but the sound that emerged was barely louder than a breath, the whisper that had been her curse since childhood. The stranger lurched forward, reaching for her, and Theresa stumbled backward into the shelves. Glass bottles rattled dangerously as she pressed herself against the wood, her whispered plea for help dying in the air before it could carry more than a few feet. The man's fingers were inches from her arm when the door crashed open again with such force that the hinges groaned in protest. The figure that filled the doorway was enormous, broad shoulders nearly spanning the frame, with dark hair that fell past his collar and muscles that strained against his buckskin shirt. His eyes, sharp and assessing, took in the scene in an instant. In 2 strides he crossed the room, his hand clamping down on the stranger's shoulder and spinning him away from Theresa with seemingly effortless strength. "I think the lady would prefer you keep your distance," the mountain man said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the small space. The drunk stranger took one look at the wall of muscle before him and seemed to deflate, mumbling incoherently as he shuffled toward the door and disappeared into the afternoon light. Theresa's hands were shaking as she set down the flour crate, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The mountain man turned to her, his expression softening. "You all right, miss?" She nodded, trying to force words past her lips, but they emerged as barely a whisper. "Thank you." His brow furrowed, and he took a step closer, leaning down slightly. "Pardon." Theresa felt heat rise to her cheeks, the familiar shame and frustration washing over her. She had been speaking in whispers for as long as she could remember, ever since the fever that had taken her parents when she was 6 years old. The doctors said there was nothing physically wrong with her voice, but no matter how hard she tried, she could never make her words carry more than a soft breath. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Thank you for helping me." He moved closer still, bending so that his ear was level with her mouth, and she caught the scent of pine and leather and something wild. "You are very welcome," he said once he had heard her properly. When he straightened, he offered her a small smile that transformed his rugged features. "Name's Ryder Lockwood. I am passing through on my way to the Rockies, but I needed to stock up on supplies." "Theresa Turner," she whispered, and watched as he leaned in again to catch her name. There was no mockery in his eyes, no impatience, just genuine attention that made something flutter in her chest. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Turner." He glanced around the trading post. "This your establishment?" She shook her head, gesturing toward the back room where her uncle was no doubt sorting through the latest shipment, oblivious to what had just transpired. "My uncle owns it. I help him run it." Ryder nodded, and she noticed the way his eyes kept scanning the room, alert and watchful even in casual conversation. He was a man accustomed to danger, she realized, someone who had learned to never fully let his guard down. "I will need rope, dried meat, coffee, and ammunition if you have any .45 caliber." Theresa moved behind the counter, grateful for something to do with her hands. As she gathered his supplies, she was acutely aware of his presence, the way he seemed to fill the entire space with quiet strength. She had to lean close to tell him the prices, and each time he bent to hear her, she felt that strange flutter return. "You have lived here long?" he asked as she wrapped his purchases in brown paper. "All my life," she whispered, and he leaned in. Well, since I was 6, my uncle took me in after my parents died. I am sorry for your loss." The sincerity in his voice made her look up, and she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "It is a fine town, seems peaceful enough." "Usually it is. That man, he was just passing through, I think." Ryder's jaw tightened. "Still, a woman alone should not have to deal with that sort of trouble." "I can manage," Theresa said, though even to her own ears the whispered words sounded unconvincing. He studied her for a long moment, and she found herself unable to look away from his gaze. "I am sure you can," he said finally, "but it does not mean you should have to." Her uncle emerged from the back room then, a stout man with thinning hair and a warm smile. "Theresa, I heard the door. Do we have a customer?" He noticed Ryder, and his expression grew cautious. "Afternoon, stranger." "Afternoon, sir. Just purchasing some supplies. Your niece here has been very helpful." Her uncle relaxed slightly at Ryder's respectful tone. "That is good to hear. Theresa, why do you not take your break now? I can finish up here." She wanted to protest, wanted to stay near this man who bent close to hear her whispers without complaint. But she knew her uncle well enough to recognize a dismissal. She nodded and removed her apron, acutely aware of Ryder's eyes following her as she moved toward the back door that led to the small living quarters above the shop. Over the next 3 days, Ryder Lockwood found reasons to return to the trading post. He needed additional supplies, he claimed, things he had forgotten on his first visit. Theresa suspected he was simply being kind, but she could not deny the way her heart lifted each time the door opened and his broad frame appeared. He would browse the shelves slowly, asking her questions about various items, and each time she answered in her soft whisper, he would lean close without hesitation. Sometimes his dark hair would brush against her cheek, and she would catch her breath at the nearness of him. He smelled of the outdoors, of freedom and wild places, and she found herself drawn to him in a way she had never experienced before. "Why do you head to the Rockies?" she asked on his 3rd visit, and he bent to hear her, his face so close she could see the small scar above his left eyebrow. "I have a cabin up in the high country," he said, straightening. "I trap beaver and hunt elk, sell the pelts and meat when I come down to trade. It is a solitary life, but it suits me." "You not get lonely?" He considered this, his gray eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes. But I grew up in these mountains, learned to read the land and the weather. Cities make me feel caged." He paused, then added more softly, "At least, they used to." The way he looked at her when he said it made heat rise to her face, and she busied herself with arranging jars on a shelf. "It must be beautiful up there." "It is," he agreed. "The air is so clean it hurts your lungs at first, and the stars at night, they look close enough to touch. In the summer the meadows fill with wildflowers in every color you can imagine." He moved closer, and when she glanced up, she found him watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. "I would like to show you someday, if you would allow it." Before Theresa could respond, a group of railroad workers pushed through the door, loud and demanding, and the moment shattered. Ryder stepped back as she moved to help the new customers, but she felt his eyes on her throughout, protective and warm. That evening, after the shop had closed and her uncle had retired for the night, Theresa sat by her window and looked out at the darkening sky. Galesburg was growing rapidly, the railroad bringing new people and commerce, but she had never felt truly part of the bustle and noise. Her whispered voice made social gatherings exhausting, and most people grew frustrated trying to hear her. She had learned to keep to herself, to find contentment in small pleasures and quiet moments. But Ryder Lockwood had listened to every word she said, leaning close without complaint, treating her whispers as though they were precious secrets meant only for him. The thought made her chest ache with longing for something she had never dared hope for. The next morning, Theresa arrived at the trading post to find Ryder already waiting outside, holding a small bouquet of late-season wildflowers. When he saw her, he straightened, suddenly looking uncertain in a way that seemed at odds with his confident bearing. "Morning, Miss Turner," he said. "I found these growing by the creek and thought you might enjoy them." She took the flowers with trembling hands, bringing them to her nose to inhale their sweet scent. "They are beautiful," she whispered, and he leaned down to hear, a smile playing at his lips. "I was hoping you might take a walk with me after you finish work today. There is something I would like to discuss with you." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I would like that." The day passed with agonizing slowness. Theresa found herself watching the clock, counting the hours until closing time. Her uncle noticed her distraction and teased her gently about the mountain man who had been haunting their shop, but his eyes were kind. He had always worried about her future, about who would care for her when he was gone. When the appointed hour finally arrived, Theresa changed into her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and met Ryder outside. The September evening was cool, the leaves just beginning to turn gold and crimson, and they walked together toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open fields. "I have been thinking," Ryder began, his long strides slowing to match her shorter steps, "about heading to the mountains and about staying here, and I have come to realize something important." Theresa's breath caught in her throat, but she remained silent, waiting. "I have spent most of my life alone," he continued. "I convinced myself I preferred it that way, that I did not need anyone. But these past few days, talking with you, listening to you, I have felt something I have not felt in a very long time." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression earnest. "I have felt like I was home." "Ryder," she whispered, and he leaned close to hear, his hands coming up to gently grasp her arms. "I know it is soon, and I know I have no right to ask, but I cannot leave without knowing. Theresa, would you consider coming with me to the mountains?" As my wife, the world seemed to stop spinning. Theresa stared up at him, at this strong, gentle man who bent close to hear her whispers, who treated her softness as strength rather than weakness. She thought of the lonely years ahead if she stayed in Galesburg, helping her uncle until he passed, and then facing the world alone. She thought of the mountains Ryder had described, of clean air and starlit skies and wildflower meadows. "Yes," she whispered, and when he leaned in to hear her answer, she said it again, louder than she had spoken in years, though still barely more than a breath. "Yes, I will marry you." The joy that lit his face was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. He pulled her close, wrapping his strong arms around her, and she felt safe in a way she never had before. When he drew back, his calloused hand came up to cup her cheek with surprising tenderness. "I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret this decision," he said. "I will lean close to hear every word you speak, and I will cherish each one." The wedding was held a week later in the small church on Main Street. Theresa's uncle walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, happy and sad all at once to see his niece leaving for a new life. Ryder stood at the altar in his best clothes, his hair neatly tied back, and the way he looked at her made Theresa feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. When it came time for her to speak her vows, the entire congregation leaned forward, straining to hear, but Ryder simply bent close, his ear near her lips, and listened to every whispered word. She promised to love him, to stand by his side through whatever challenges they would face, and when he slipped the simple gold band on her finger, she felt tears of happiness spill down her cheeks. They spent their wedding night in the small hotel on the edge of town, and Ryder was as gentle with her as she had known he would be. He whispered his own promises against her skin, told her she was perfect, beautiful, his. And when she responded in her soft voice, he listened to every word as though committing them to memory. The journey to the Rockies took 3 weeks. They traveled by train to the end of the line, then by wagon and finally by horse into the high country. Theresa had never been more than a few miles from Galesburg, and the vastness of the landscape both thrilled and terrified her. But Ryder was patient, pointing out landmarks and wildlife, making camp each evening and ensuring she was comfortable before seeing to his own needs. The further they traveled from civilization, the more he seemed to come alive. His movements became more fluid, his eyes sharper, and Theresa realized she was seeing him as he truly was, a man meant for wild places and open sky. And yet he never made her feel like a burden, never seemed impatient with her inexperience or her whispered questions. "How much further?" she asked one evening as they sat by the campfire, the stars brilliant overhead. He considered, his arm warm around her shoulders. 2 more days, maybe 3. The cabin is in a valley near a mountain stream. It is not fancy, but it is sturdy and warm. I built it myself 5 years ago. "I am sure it is perfect," she whispered, and he bent to hear, then kissed her forehead. "I have been thinking about adding a room," he said. "For when children come, if we are blessed." The thought of carrying Ryder's child, of raising a family in the mountains, filled Theresa with a fierce joy. "I would like that very much." They reached the cabin on a crisp October afternoon, the aspens already turned gold and trembling in the breeze. Theresa's first glimpse of their new home took her breath away. It sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, a solid structure of hewn logs with a stone chimney and glass windows that glinted in the sunlight. Beyond it, the stream Ryder had mentioned tumbled over smooth rocks, its song carrying clearly in the mountain air. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lockwood," Ryder said, and the pride in his voice made her smile. He lifted her from her horse and carried her over the threshold, and she laughed at the tradition maintained even here in the wilderness. The interior was simple but well made, with a large fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, and a bed covered in thick furs. Shelves lined one wall, waiting to be filled, and hooks near the door held Ryder's winter coat and spare rifle. "It is wonderful," Theresa whispered, and Ryder, setting her down gently, leaned close to hear. "I am glad you think so. I was worried it might be too rough for you." She turned in his arms, looking up at him seriously. "I did not marry you for comfort, Ryder. I married you for love." The kiss he gave her then was deep and claiming, and Theresa melted into him, marveling at how right it felt to be here, in this wild place, with this wild man who listened to her whispers as though they were shouts. The first months of their marriage were an education. Ryder taught Theresa how to identify animal tracks, how to preserve meat for the winter, how to read the weather in the behavior of birds and the quality of light. She learned to make candles and soap, to tan hides and sew buckskin, skills that would have been unimaginable to her back in Galesburg. Winter came early to the high country, sweeping in on a November storm that left 3 feet of snow in a single night. Theresa woke to find their cabin transformed into a snow cave, the windows frosted over with intricate patterns, and Ryder already up and stoking the fire. "Good morning," she whispered, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders as she padded across the cold floor. He turned, his face lighting at the sight of her. "Morning, beautiful. How did you sleep?" "Warm," she said, and he crossed to her, bending to hear before pulling her into his arms. "The storm should break by afternoon, but we will be snowed in for a few days at least. Good thing I stocked up on firewood." Theresa found she did not mind being confined to the cabin with Ryder. They spent the days working side by side on various projects, and the evenings curled together near the fire while he read to her from the few books he owned, or she mended their clothes. Sometimes they simply talked, and Ryder would lean close to hear her whispered stories about growing up in Galesburg, her memories of her parents, her dreams for their future. "I want at least 4 children," she told him one night, feeling bold. He raised his eyebrows, a grin tugging at his lips. "4? That is ambitious." "Is it too many?" "Not at all," he said, pulling her into his lap. "I think 4 children sounds perfect, though we should probably get started on making that addition soon." True to his word, when spring arrived and the snow began to melt, Ryder began work on expanding the cabin. Theresa helped where she could, handing him tools and holding boards steady while he hammered. And together, they created 2 additional rooms that would serve as bedrooms for the children they hoped would come. It was in late summer, nearly a year after their wedding, that Theresa realized she was with child. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when she was finally certain, she waited until evening to tell Ryder. They were sitting outside watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold, and she whispered the news against his ear. For a moment he sat perfectly still, as though he had not heard her correctly. Then he turned to her, his eyes searching her face. "Truly?" She nodded, happy tears spilling down her cheeks. "Truly." The whoop of joy he let out echoed off the surrounding peaks, and he lifted her carefully, spinning her in a circle before setting her down and dropping to his knees. He pressed his ear to her still flat belly, as though he could hear the tiny life growing within, and Theresa ran her fingers through his long hair, overcome with love for this gentle giant of a man. "Thank you," he whispered against her skin. "Thank you for this gift, for being my wife, for making this place a home." The pregnancy was not easy. The isolation of the mountain cabin meant no doctor, no midwife, only Ryder and whatever knowledge he had gleaned from helping animals give birth over the years. But he was attentive and careful, refusing to let Theresa do anything strenuous, hunting and trapping with renewed vigor to ensure they had plenty of supplies laid in for when the baby came. Their son was born on a freezing February night in 1880, his arrival announced by strong cries that filled the cabin. Ryder caught him with shaking hands, cutting the cord and wrapping him in soft blankets before placing him in Theresa's exhausted arms. "He is perfect," she whispered, and Ryder leaned close to hear, his own eyes wet with tears. "Just like his mother," he said, kissing her forehead. "What should we name him?" They called him Jack after Theresa's father, and he became the center of their world. Ryder proved to be a devoted father, carrying the baby in a sling across his chest while he did chores, singing to him in a surprisingly pleasant baritone, and leaning close whenever Theresa's whispered lullabies filled the cabin at night. Watching Ryder with their son, seeing the gentleness in his strong hands and the love in his eyes, Theresa fell even deeper in love with her husband. He was provider and protector, teacher and friend, and she thanked God daily for the drunk stranger who had stumbled into the trading post and brought Ryder Lockwood into her life. When Jack was 6 months old, Ryder suggested they make the journey down to the nearest town to trade furs and purchase supplies. It would be the first time Theresa had been around other people since their wedding, and she felt anxious about it, worried about her whispered voice in the bustling marketplace. "You do not have to come if you do not want to," Ryder assured her. "I can make the trip alone." But Theresa shook her head. "We are a family. We should do this together." The town was called Silver Creek, Montana, a rough mining settlement that had sprung up around a silver strike 3 years prior. It was loud and dirty and full of people, and Theresa felt overwhelmed almost immediately. But Ryder kept one arm around her waist and the other holding Jack, cutting a path through the crowds with his sheer size and presence. At the trading post, the proprietor tried to cheat them on the price for Ryder's furs, claiming they were inferior quality. Theresa could see the anger tightening her husband's jaw, but before he could respond, she stepped forward. "Those are prime beaver pelts," she whispered, "and you know it." The man leaned forward, cupping his ear. "What's that? Speak up, woman." Ryder's arm shot out, his hand slamming down on the counter with enough force to rattle the entire display. "The lady said they are prime beaver pelts, and you know it. Now you can give us a fair price, or we can take our business elsewhere." The proprietor paled at the barely controlled violence in Ryder's voice and quickly agreed to a fair trade. As they left the shop, supplies in hand, Theresa felt a swell of gratitude for her husband's protection, but also a twinge of sadness. Would she never be able to speak for herself in the world beyond their cabin? Ryder must have sensed her mood because that evening at the small hotel where they stayed, he pulled her close. "I am sorry if I overstepped back there." "You did not," she whispered, and he bent to hear. "I just wish my voice carried more. I wish I could speak for myself." "You do speak for yourself," he said firmly. "Every day in 100 different ways. Your voice may be quiet, but your words carry weight with those who matter. And anyone who does not take the time to listen does not deserve to hear what you have to say." His words soothed the ache in her heart, and she kissed him deeply, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. Jack fussed from his cradle, and they broke apart laughing. The moment of melancholy passed. They returned to the mountains with renewed appreciation for their isolated life. The years flowed like the stream beside their cabin, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their family. Theresa gave birth to a daughter they named Rose in the spring of 1882, and then to twin boys, Samuel and Simon, in the winter of 1884. The cabin rang with laughter and sometimes tears, and Ryder built yet another addition to accommodate their growing brood. Jack grew tall and strong like his father, learning to trap and hunt almost as soon as he could walk. Rose was gentle and thoughtful, often found sitting with her mother learning to sew or preserve food. The twins were wild and adventurous, constantly getting into mischief that had Ryder alternately exasperated and proud. Through it all, Theresa continued to speak in whispers, and Ryder continued to lean close to hear every word. It became their ritual, their intimacy, the thing that set them apart. The children learned early that when Papa bent his head to Mama, they needed to be quiet and wait, because something important was being said. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1888, Ryder surprised Theresa by taking her on a picnic to a high meadow he had discovered. They left the children in the care of Jack, now 8 and responsible enough to watch his siblings for a few hours, and rode together through the forest. The meadow was everything Ryder had promised during those early days in Galesburg. Wildflowers carpeted the ground in riots of purple and yellow and red, and the mountains rose all around them like ancient sentinels. Theresa dismounted and walked through the blooms, her hands trailing over the soft petals, her heart full to bursting. "You ever regret it?" Ryder asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Leaving civilization for this wild life." Theresa turned in his embrace, looking up at the man she loved more with each passing year. His hair was longer now, streaked with a few strands of gray, and his face bore the weathered lines of a life lived outdoors. But his eyes were the same, warm and devoted, and the strength in his arms had not diminished. "Never," she whispered, and he bent close to hear. "This is the life I was meant for. You are the man I was meant for. Everything that came before was just waiting for you to walk through that door." He kissed her then, deep and slow, and they sank down into the flowers together. They made love there in the meadow with the sky stretching endlessly above them, and Theresa thought her heart might burst from the joy of it all. When they returned to the cabin that evening, they found chaos. The twins had gotten into a fight with Jack. Rose was crying because her favorite doll had been caught in the crossfire, and the cabin was a disaster. Theresa looked at Ryder, and they both burst out laughing at the absurdity of going from romantic meadow to domestic mayhem in the space of a few hours. "Welcome home," Ryder said dryly, and Theresa could not have agreed more. The children grew older, and new challenges arose. Jack announced at 15 that he wanted to head south to seek his fortune, convinced there was more to life than trapping and hunting. Theresa's heart broke at the thought of him leaving, but Ryder sat their son down and had a long talk with him. "You are old enough to make your own choices," Ryder said. "But before you go chasing something you think you are missing, make sure you appreciate what you have. The world out there, it is not always kind to those who do not have a place in it. You have a place here, son. You have a family that loves you and land that will provide for you. Think hard before you walk away from that." Jack did think hard, and in the end, he decided to stay. He built his own small cabin a mile from theirs and began his own trap line, and Theresa was grateful beyond measure that Ryder's wisdom had kept their son close. Rose blossomed into a beautiful young woman, and when she was 18, a young man from Silver Creek came courting. His name was Daniel, and he had kind eyes and a steady disposition. Ryder interrogated him thoroughly, making sure his intentions were honorable, and eventually gave his blessing. The wedding was held in their meadow, the same place where Theresa and Ryder had celebrated their anniversary, and it was one of the happiest days of Theresa's life. The twins eventually went into business together, opening a trading post in Silver Creek that catered to trappers and miners. They were shrewd businessmen, having learned from watching their parents trade over the years, and they prospered. They visited often, bringing grandchildren for Theresa and Ryder to dote on, and the cabin once again filled with the sounds of young voices. Time moved forward in its relentless way. Theresa's hair turned silver, and Ryder's shoulders, while still broad, began to carry the weight of years. But their love never diminished. Every morning, Ryder would lean close to hear Theresa's whispered good morning, and every night he would bend to catch her whispered "I love you" before they fell asleep in each other's arms. In the spring of 1905, Ryder fell ill. It started as a cough, nothing serious, but it settled in his chest and would not leave. Theresa nursed him with all the knowledge she had accumulated over their years together, but she could see him weakening day by day. The children came, gathering around their father's bedside, and Ryder clasped each of their hands in turn, giving them his final words of wisdom and love. When they were alone, Ryder reached for Theresa's hand, his grip still strong despite his illness. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice hoarse. She leaned close, tears streaming down her face. "What is it, my love?" "Thank you for giving me a life worth living," he whispered, and she realized he was whispering to match her, this man who had spent 27 years bending close to hear her voice. "Thank you for 4 beautiful children and a home filled with love. Thank you for every whispered word, every quiet moment, every day we have shared. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Theresa Lockwood." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," she whispered back. "I love you, Ryder. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." He smiled, that same smile that had transformed his rugged features all those years ago in the trading post. "And I will love you for all eternity," he said. "Wait for me when your time comes. I will be listening for your whisper." He passed that night, slipping away peacefully with Theresa holding his hand. The grief was like a physical weight on her chest, crushing and overwhelming, but she bore it as she had borne every challenge in her life, with quiet strength. They buried him in the meadow where they had celebrated their love, beneath the endless Montana sky he had loved so well. Theresa lived on in the cabin for several more years, tended by her children and grandchildren who made sure she never wanted for anything. She spent her days working in the garden Ryder had built for her, preserving food in the ways he had taught her, and remembering. Every evening she would walk to his grave and whisper to him about her day, about the children, about how much she missed him. One autumn evening in 1908, as the aspens turned gold and the air grew crisp, Theresa felt a profound weariness settle over her. She knew her time was drawing close, and she was not afraid. She gathered her children around her and told them how proud she was of each of them, how grateful she was for the lives they had built and the love they had shown her. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered, and they all leaned close to hear, just as Ryder had taught them. "He loved you all so much, and so do I." That night, Theresa lay down in the bed she had shared with Ryder for so many years, wrapped in the furs he had hunted and tanned with his own hands. She closed her eyes and let herself drift, thinking of a September day in 1878 when a mountain man had walked through a door and changed her life forever. In her dreams, she was young again, standing in the trading post with a crate of flour in her arms. The door opened, and there he was, broad and strong and beautiful, his eyes finding hers across the room. She tried to speak, but her voice came out as a whisper, and he leaned close to hear, so close she could smell pine and leather and freedom. "I have been waiting for you," she said, and this time her voice rang out clear and strong, no longer confined to whispers. Ryder smiled, taking her hand in his. "And I have been waiting for you, my love. Come with me. The mountains are calling, and there are wildflower meadows to explore." She went with him gladly, leaving behind the weight of years and grief and loss. Together they walked into forever, his hand in hers, his head bent close to catch every word she spoke, just as he always had and always would. Back in the cabin, Theresa Turner Lockwood passed peacefully in her sleep, a smile on her weathered face. Her children found her in the morning and wept, but they also smiled, because they knew she was with their father again, and that love like theirs could never truly die. They buried her next to Ryder in the meadow, and the entire community came to pay their respects to the quiet woman who had raised such a fine family and loved so completely. The grandchildren picked wildflowers and scattered them over the graves, and Jack, now 50 years old with silver in his own hair, stood before the gathering and spoke. "My mother never raised her voice above a whisper in all the years I knew her," he said. "But her impact on this world was louder than any shout could ever be. She taught us that strength comes in many forms, that love requires patience and attention, and that the most important words are often the ones spoken quietly. My father understood this. He spent every day of their marriage leaning close to hear what she had to say, because he knew her words were worth listening to." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "They built a life together in these mountains, a life of hard work and deep love and simple joys. They taught us what truly matters. And though they are gone now, their legacy lives on in every one of us, in every grandchild and great-grandchild, in the way we love and listen and lean close to those who matter most." The service ended with a hymn, sung by voices that carried across the meadow and echoed off the mountains. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, the family dispersed, each carrying with them memories of two extraordinary people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. Years passed, and the cabin remained in the family, passed down through generations. It became a place of pilgrimage, where descendants would come to remember and reconnect with the story of Theresa and Ryder. The meadow where they were buried became a place of proposals and weddings, a place where love was celebrated and honored. Jack's daughter became a writer and penned a book about her grandparents, telling the story of the girl who whispered and the mountain man who leaned close. It became a bestseller, touching hearts across the nation, and the cabin received visitors from as far away as New York and Boston, all wanting to see the place where such a love had flourished. Rose's granddaughter became a doctor who specialized in helping children with speech difficulties, inspired by stories of her great-grandmother. She developed techniques that helped countless children find their voices, and she always told her patients about Theresa, about how a whisper could be just as powerful as a shout if someone cared enough to listen. The twins' descendants continued to run trading posts and businesses throughout Montana, always dealing fairly and honestly, upholding the values Ryder and Theresa had instilled in their children. They became known for their integrity and their willingness to listen, truly listen, to what their customers needed. The legacy of Ryder and Theresa Lockwood spread far beyond what they could have ever imagined, touching lives and inspiring love for generations. But at the heart of it all was a simple truth: that love requires patience, that true intimacy is found in the quiet moments, and that sometimes the most profound connections come not from grand gestures, but from the willingness to lean close and hear what someone has to say. In the meadow where they rest, wildflowers continue to bloom every spring, painting the ground in brilliant colors. The stream still tumbles over smooth rocks, its song carrying clearly in the mountain air. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispers through the pines, some say you can hear the echo of two voices, whispering words of love that will never fade, bound together for all eternity in the wild beauty of the mountains they called home. The cabin still stands, weathered but strong, a testament to the hands that built it and the love that filled it. The fireplace where Ryder and Theresa warmed themselves on cold winter nights still draws visitors who sit beside it and imagine what it must have been like to live such a life. The bedroom where 4 children were born and countless quiet conversations were shared remains much as it was, preserved as a reminder of simpler times. On the shelves that Ryder built now sit photographs spanning generations. Theresa and Ryder on their wedding day, young and full of hope. The family gathered outside the cabin, children of various ages surrounding their parents. Jack with his first elk, Rose in her wedding dress, the twins as boys covered in mud and grinning, and later photographs of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all carrying in their faces some echo of the couple who started it all. Visitors to the cabin often remark on the sense of peace that pervades the place, as though the love that was built there has seeped into the very logs and stones. They walk through the rooms slowly, reverently, trying to imagine the life that unfolded within these walls. They picture Theresa at the stove, preparing meals for her family. Ryder sitting at the table, mending traps or cleaning his rifle. Children playing on the floor, their laughter ringing out. And they imagine the countless times Ryder must have leaned close to Theresa, his ear near her lips, listening to her whispered words with the full attention that true love demands. It is this image, more than any other, that captures the essence of their relationship and continues to inspire those who hear their story. In the end, Theresa and Ryder Lockwood were not famous in the traditional sense. They did not change the course of history or leave behind great wealth or monuments. What they left was something far more valuable, a legacy of love, of devotion, of seeing and hearing and cherishing another person completely. They showed that happiness is not found in grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but in the daily choice to lean close, to listen, to value what someone has to say. Their story is a reminder that every person has a voice worth hearing, even if it is only a whisper. That true strength comes not from volume but from substance. That the most powerful words are often spoken softly, shared between two people who have learned to truly listen to each other. And that love, real love, is found not in the easy moments but in the willingness to bend close again and again, to hear what the other has to say. As the sun sets over the Montana mountains, casting long shadows across the meadow where Theresa and Ryder rest, the wildflowers bow their heads in the evening breeze. The stream continues its eternal song, and somewhere in the vast sky above, two souls dance together in the freedom they always cherished, bound by a love that was strong enough to last a lifetime and gentle enough to honor a whisper. Their story is not just theirs alone. It belongs to everyone who has ever loved quietly, who has ever felt unheard, who has ever needed someone to lean close and truly listen. It is a story of hope and healing, of finding your place in the world and the person who makes that place feel like home. It is a story that will continue to be told as long as there are hearts that yearn for connection and voices that need to be heard. And in the end, that is the greatest legacy of all, not what we leave behind in material things, but what we leave behind in the hearts of others. Theresa and Ryder Lockwood left behind a family that knows how to love, a community that understands the value of listening, and a story that continues to inspire long after their whispers have faded into the eternal silence. The mountains stand as they always have, ancient and unchanging, witnesses to the brief and beautiful lives of those who make their homes in the shadows of the peaks. And among the countless stories those mountains could tell, the story of the girl who whispered and the mountain man who leaned close shines as brightly as any star in the vast Montana sky.